has said this. Today's date is November 10, 2024. We are having an Israeli-Palestinian federal government simulation. Our guest today is Avner Dinur. We are proposing a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine. A federal government that would have three branches: a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch, equal to the Palestinians and the Israelis in the area that includes Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, with 300 parliament members that are Palestinians and Israelis elected in 300 districts, with a president and vice president, one Palestinian, one Israeli, rotating in 2 years, and a judicial branch with Palestinians and Israelis in the judicial branch together as equal. We have a constitution. You can read the constitution in 3 languages, in Arabic, English, and Hebrew, at our website, which is ipconfederation.org. And in the Constitution, once you click Constitution in our website, you will be able to read the entire Constitution with the preamble, with the function, with several articles in the Constitution describing the functions of each segment of each branch of the government, how it will function, and what are the duties and how they will be elected of each branch of government. You can also read the question and answers in 3 languages, which would make it easier understanding. But I think the Constitution itself is very, very interesting, and I hope you read it. My name is Joseph Avasar. You could reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Our guest today is Dr. Avner Dinur. Dr. Avner Dinur is a secular theologian residing in Sderot, near the Gaza border. He lectures on Jewish studies at Sapir College and Bar Ilan University. He is the co-author of the Matanel Bar Ilan Forum for French Jewish Thought and the co-chair of FAB, Friendship Across Borders, a collaborative initiative between individuals in Germany, Palestine, and Israel. He is also a member of the founding group of a new political party called All Its Citizens. His book, Something to Believe in, Secular Theology, was published in Hebrew by IDRA Publishing in 2023. Additionally, he co-edited the volume Israel, Culture, and Emergency Routine, Normalizing Stress, which was published by Lexington Press in 2024, alongside editors Vered Weiss and Irit Ronen. Our next guest in our next simulation on November 24 is Rami Aman. He is a Palestinian journalist and a peace activist in the Gaza Strip. I believe he now resides in Cairo. Our guest on December 8, 2024 is Yanis Varoufakis, who was a former Minister of Finance of Greece. I know that I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, and I apologize for that. I was corrected last time, and I'm trying to remember what was the correct pronunciation, and I apologize for mispronouncing his name. Our guest on December 22nd is David Veto, who is a history professor at the University of Alabama. He is following our progress, the IPC progress, and is very interested in the subject and very familiar with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Our guest on January 5th is Omer Shaban. He is a Palestinian analyst on political economy of the Middle East and a candidate in the first Palestinian parliamentary election in 1996. We are proposing a federal government. We are proposing a system of government. We are not proposing any substantive policies for that government. What we are showing is what we call threading the needle. It means that we are demonstrating how a federal government will be able to pass legislation that will be accepted to both the Palestinians and the Israelis. Believe it or not, it is possible to pass legislation that neither the Israeli or the Palestinian governments will be able, or in our opinion, will be able to veto. And that's what we call threading the needle. And we are demonstrating in this simulation how it will do that. So we are asking you to be respectful of our simulation. This is not a lecture, it's a simulation. And we are asking you, and we're encouraging you to ask questions. Please put the questions in the chat. And Nasir, are you here?
Yes, Joseph, I'm here.
Thank you so much. So Nasir will administer the question. What Nasir will convey those questions to us immediately when the questions are being asked, and he will also translate or convert comments into a question, because we want to have a productive, positive experience, and therefore we will convert the comments, or Nasir will convert the comments into a question. Now, at the end of the simulation, we will have an open session where you'll be able to ask Mr. Dinur any question you want and to make any comments for that matter. But please, ask the questions now. We love questions. The questions clarify the issues. There are no questions that are unacceptable. We accept all questions. Ask the questions and keep your comments to the end. Thank you. This is a short video that explains what is our vision for a federal confederation government.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity, acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So before we go to our guest for an opening statement, we would like to conduct a pre-simulation survey, which we will compare to a post-simulation survey which will be immediately when the simulation is done. So at this time, we're asking you, do you support a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Please vote if you support, or no. Say yes if you support, no if you do not support. Okay. We're going to give you another 15 seconds to vote, and we will compare the vote at the end of the simulation. Okay. Dan, could you please publish the vote? 28 out of 29 voted yes, which is 97%. And 1 out of 29 voted no, which is 3%. We have 40-some people. I know some people are not able to vote because they're on their phone or their computer. It prevents them from voting for some reason. But we will compare the vote at the end of the simulation. Now, Avner asked to make an opening statement, so I'm going to stop the sharing my computer, and I'm going to let Avner make his opening statement, and then we'll go up back to the PowerPoint to continue with the simulation. So hello, Avner, and you're welcome to make your opening statement.
Hello, everyone. So nice to be in this place, in this very interesting initiative. I'll say just a few words about myself and about why I want to support this kind of work. As Joseph said, I live in Sderot, near the border with Gaza. Every 5 minutes, you have you might even be able to hear some booms every 5 minutes, more or less, once a day. No, I'll say maybe once in 3 days. We have still an alarm here, but most of the time it's more or less quiet. So if I'm running out of the room in the middle of the simulation, it's because of an alarm. As you probably know, Sderot was evacuated during the war from October 8th until April, more or less. I was not able to live in my house, evacuated and like a refugee in my own state, in my own country, you might say. And for this reason, I feel that I have an urge, and it's very important to me to bring peace. And it's something very urgent for me personally. As Bill said earlier, I'm involved in two things that I'd like to kind of frame here as two ways of work that should be done. One is the FAB, Friendship Across Borders, which is an organization that is involved in dialogue between Israelis, Palestinians, and Germans. I think dialogue is absolutely necessary, and but there's something when you do dialogue, and we are doing dialogue for the last 15 years. When you do dialogue, you feel many times that the Israelis come to meet, want to see each other, and want to see the Palestinians, and so on, and the Palestinians want to meet the Israelis. But in the minute the dialogue ends, people go back to their places, and their complete imbalance of power and very brutal reality in the West Bank, and in the past also we had people from Gaza. So when you only have dialogue, and this is the whole thing, something very wrong is happening. So I think the other side, the other branch of what's needed to be done is political work. And political work means that we need some kind of a vision, some kind of a way to move forward. And I believe in many ways the political system in Israel is very, very wrong. And I feel that in both ways, dialogue and political work, what you are doing here in the Israel-Palestinian Confederation is something very, very important and very, very needed. And I would say maybe one more thing that is important, the way I'm doing political work is a little bit different. Maybe even we have some kind of disagreement, Joseph and me, when we spoke about that earlier. I'm involved in the new party called All Its Citizens, the first party in Israel in 70 something years, first party that is completely equal Palestinians and Israelis, Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews, completely equal. A party, we're not talking about Hadash, that is an Arabic party with one Jewish member. We're not talking about Yesh Atid or the Labour Party, where you have everybody are Jews and you have one or two Arabs. We're talking about something completely parallel, and we're talking in this. We want to promote in this party a way forward that I would like to say just in 2 or 3 words. And if you want to learn more, you feel welcome to contact me or to go online and look for it. All its citizens, Kul Muwataniya, Kul Izrachia. Just to say something very short about the ideology. The ideology is that there are 2 things that are impossible for Israelis and Palestinians. One is full union. It's quite easy to see that a full union between the 2 peoples, and to have one democracy that is completely doesn't take in any account the national or the religious or the cultural differences would be very wrong. And therefore, a lot of the symbols and the ideas about what does it mean to be Palestinian and what does it mean to be Israeli Jew would stay the same. This is one thing that is impossible, and the other thing that is impossible on the other side is separation. Jews and Arabs would still live together in the next 50, 100, 200 years in Israel. It's very clear to see that this is the future that we are heading to. And I think in many ways, a lot of the work of the left in Israel was directed to the wrong direction in the last, I don't know, maybe you can say 30 years, maybe you can say maybe 50 years. The left is talking about separation. I think the failure of the Oslo Accords was more than anything else based on this idea that peace will come through separation between the nations. Since full separation would not happen, I think it's not possible, and I think it's not desirable. And full union is not possible. It's not possible and not desirable. Something in the middle needs to be achieved. And I think for this work, what you are doing here, what we are doing here in the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way to dance between these poles and to find the right way for the future. I think that will be all for now, but I might add later some more. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you, Avner. So we're gonna go on with the and this is the platform of the All Its Citizen Party. I couldn't put the whole page, it was just too long, but you can look at it. The platform, I don't think is in English, it's only in Arabic and in Hebrew. If you want to contact Avner Dinur, you're welcome to send me an email. I'll send you his contact information. Avner, if you want to put your
I'm gonna
email
post
on
the
the
link.
chat.
I'm gonna post the link from their website. The platform is available in English. It's in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. I'll put the link in the chat box.
Oh, okay, terrific. From what I understood from Avner, this is a party of all its citizens. That means the citizens of Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong. It does not include the Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza because they are not citizens of Israel. So
It also doesn't include Palestinians in the West Bank, but a lot of the ideology, a lot of what we speak about, has to do with peace and with the Palestinians, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And still, it is a political party running for the Israeli parliament, for the Knesset, and in many ways, what we want to achieve is taking some of the power of the Knesset and moving it to a different place, and that's why I think the Confederation is something very, very needed.
all right, thank
May
you.
I ask him a quick question? Just a very
Let's wait until the end. Let me finish the simulation and then we'll get into, if you have a question, then put it in the chat and Nasir will translate that. On December 22nd, we are going to have an ad in the New York Times. It's going to be in the news section, the main section of this Sunday New York Times. It says, you're invited to participate in live simulations that demonstrate how a confederation government can bring peace between the Israeli and the Palestinian people. Learn more about the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation and our website, ipconfederation.org. Like I said, look for it on December 22nd, 2024. I want to thank those of you that are participating today that have donated for this ad, and we need more donation, but we're scheduling this New York Times ad for December 22nd, 2024. Avner also asked me or made a distinction between confederation and federation, and some other guests have made or inquired about that distinction. We define it the same. Confederation and federal governments exist worldwide to address specific conflicts. Some governments refer to themselves as federal governments, while others use the term confederation. Definitions are not fixed and evolve with changing realities. In the context of Israel-Palestine, the IPC defines confederation as a shared government for the people of Israel and Palestine, guided by democratic principles outlined in the IPC Constitution, which can be found at www.ipconfederation.org. This is the heart of the simulation, and it involves several points. The main points are in these assumptions. The first one is that you will have to assume as guests that we were able to acquire major funding for a 1-year long campaign to promote the idea of a federal government, to promote it to the people of Israel and Palestine for 1 year, and to promote the option for Palestinians and Israelis to decide to run for the parliament and for president, all parliament members representing 300 representing their district in 300 districts, and the president represent the entire area of Israel and Palestine. So you will have to assume that we were able to find the funding to do so, and to create a platform for Israelis and Palestinians to run and to vote, and that the election will take 3 months. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is that we gave 14 million people, with the exclusion of children, the right to vote in the area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. That's the second assumption. The third assumption that we are working under in this simulation is that 5 million people have voted, 3 million Palestinians have voted, and 2 million Israelis have voted. You will also have to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes, and the vice president received 1.3 million votes. For the purpose of this simulation, I'm going to be acting as the president who received 1.5 million votes, as an Israeli president who received 1.5 million votes. So that it is clear, I never will run as president. I do not even qualify to be president, because I am not a resident of Israel. I'm a citizen of Israel, but not a resident, and therefore I am precluded from becoming president, or for that matter, running for any office or voting. However, for the purpose of this simulation, please assume that I have been elected. You will also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts. I will ask all of you to participate as parliament members, whether Israeli or Palestinians. But you'll have to make that assumption that the election elected 300 parliament members, and each one of you as parliament members representing 47,000 people. Before I go to Avner for his questions or comments, do the people in the audience, excluding Avner, do you have any questions regarding these assumptions? Please ask those questions now. Don?
I just have a question. How do you see determining where the districts are? How will the IPC go about creating the districts? What will be the approach to determining them?
The districts will be created by a computer algorithm. If you are concerned about gerrymandering, there is no such concern, because even if there are more Palestinians or more Israelis elected, it doesn't mean that the Palestinians or the Israelis or the greater number of Israelis or the greater number of Palestinians will be able to make a difference, because you still need 55% of the Palestinian or the Israeli parliament members to vote in favor of legislation. But to answer the question is that the district will be created by a computer algorithm. And it is possible to do it. In fact, we have done it before.
Mm-hmm.
Any other question? Una?
Hi, first of all, good evening, Joseph, and thank you, Avner. Yes. One question I've been puzzled. You're saying to be elected president of Palestine, you have to be resident. Am I right or not right? You cannot be living outside Palestine. But
yeah, to be elected as president of the federal government, you have to be a citizen of Israel or Palestine,
okay.
And you have to be a resident
Yeah.
for at least 6 months in
Okay.
the area of Israel and Palestine.
But if you don't mind me saying so, at the moment, Israel is totally murdering all those people who could become president. How would you find someone who's going to be able to do it? Everybody's being murdered at the moment.
You're making
I'm just-
under the Constitution, you have to be a citizen of Israel Palestine and a resident of Israel Palestine.
Yeah, but they've
Those
been
that are
killed.
outside, that do not reside or are not citizens, are not qualified to run or not qualified to vote. This is a federal government that created for the people of Israel and Palestine, not for the Palestinian people, not for the Israeli people, but for the entire group of people, the 14 million people who reside in Israel, Palestine. Any other questions?
Hey, Joseph, this question came up last week and we missed it, and it came up again. It says, I don't understand the third assumption, and I think it's because in the 5 million people who voted, you put 3 million Palestinians and 2 million Israelis. This question comes up a bit. Why are you putting 3 million Palestinians and 2 million Israelis?
Because based on the simulations that we have done, and because of the responses that we get from Palestinians and Israelis, we are making the arbitrary assumption that Palestinians would be more interested in voting than Israelis. This is just an assumption. It's an arbitrary assumption. It may not be accurate, but based on my many simulations that we have done, we saw much greater receptivity by Palestinians than Israelis to this federal government. Any other questions? All right. Hearing no other questions, let's go to Avner. Avner, do you have any questions or comments? And my specific question to you is, do you see these assumptions as being realistic if we are able to obtain major funding for a year-long campaign promoting the elections?
Thank you. I see these assumptions as great, as really very hopeful. I see the point about having more Palestinians supporting the idea than Israelis. It makes sense to me. And still, I think I don't want to say anything about the first assumption about the money. I don't know how to raise such such funding and how much is needed. I really don't have any clue about that. But I do think that all the other assumptions, even if you do have the money, are very unrealistic and very far from possible. I believe that the direction of building an Israeli-Palestinian confederation and an Israeli-Palestinian parliament and court and a parliament, court, bank, the main institutions that will be shared, and I'm absolutely sure that these shared institutions will be erected someday. I believe the way towards that these goals, is not through just publishing that you have an election and having people vote, but it goes through political work in the place where the power is now centralized, which is the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. I think there is where a lot of the work should be done. And when I'm saying that a lot of the work should be done there, I don't mean that tomorrow we will have, I don't know, 20 or 30 Knesset members that would vote for these ideas. I mean that even if you have something very small as a party, the minimum party that can be in Knesset, which is 4 Knesset members only, if you have a new voice, something that Israelis and Palestinians never heard before in this branch of power. I think this is the way to move forward, and I believe that it would make a big change, and eventually leaders would sign agreements that would support this direction that of building a confederation. And until then, as much publicity, as much work that we are doing now in this simulation, as much other campaigns that could be done is great, is wonderful, it should be done. But I don't think it's in any way realistic to have these numbers. I think you can expect a few hundreds at the most to vote in this kind of elections. I'm saying it, of course, very sadly. I'm very sad about that, but I think this is realistic.
All right. You said that it's an unrealistic number. My question to you is, I think you mentioned that you support the idea, and you're running for to be part of the Israeli Knesset, and you think that the Israeli Knesset one day may adopt a similar system. Just want to tell you that we do not believe that the Israeli system is able to create such a federal government that will be in competition with the Israeli system. And furthermore, in my opinion, it's not desirable to have the Israeli or the Palestinian governments creating a federal government, because they will control the federal government. And in order to have an independent and separate government that will be able to be free and make its own decisions to make peace for the people of Israel and Palestine, the last thing they need is to be controlled by the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, who are, by the way, not legitimate governments in Israel, Palestine, because the Israeli government is not elected by the Palestinian government, and the Palestinian government is not elected by the Israeli people. We are proposing an independent, separate federal government that would be independent of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments and not under their control. Shlomo, I see your hand being raised, but I know you want to make a comment. Please write your comment in the or wait until the end, because we need to move forward.
No, I just have a very quick question. Why not to include the people in the diaspora, both Israeli American or Israeli Europeans and the Palestinian from other countries? I'm not sure why not to include them in some form. Maybe not, I don't know, maybe a second tier, I don't know, but they should have a say too. We are here. I don't know if there is any one Israeli except for Avner who participates in this right now.
Well, because the idea is to have not a Palestinian government or Israeli government, but to have a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine, the people who reside in Israel and Palestine. Now, the Israeli government is responsible for the Israeli people, the Jewish people, all over the world. The Palestinian government is responsible for the Palestinian people and all over the world. They can create their own election system that would include those people that they desire to include in their own government. But quite frankly, to create a federal government and to tell people from all over the world to be able to vote there without them residing there and without the ability to check their residency and their citizenship is just a poison pill that you're throwing into this federal government. It will destroy the idea of a federal government. Our purpose is to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. If the Israeli government wants to include Jewish people, Israeli people, if the Palestinian want to include Palestinian people, it's their function to do it. This is not a government that is created to be a all-encompassing for all the people in Israel, Israelis and Palestinian people worldwide. It's for the sole purpose of making peace. I hope I answered your question. All right, let's go to the. So we are asking you, parliament members, to be parliament members and to decide whether you are a Palestinian parliament member or Israeli parliament member. Please make your choice at this time, whether you are a Palestinian parliament member and Israeli parliament member, and make your choice of the area that you represent. In other words, in Israel or Palestine, because you may be asked, what is your area during the time of voting? So remain intellectually honest, remain whatever you decided, whether you're a Palestinian or Israeli, and decide on the area that you want to represent. And Avner, you are also allowed to participate, to be either Israeli or Palestinian member, parliament member, and decide what area you want to represent. You may want to represent the area that you live in, Sderot. Okay.
Of course, I want to represent Sderot. Of course.
Okay, terrific. So, did you vote whether you are an Israeli parliament member in Sderot? Did you vote as Israeli parliament member? Okay, publish the vote. We have 18 Palestinian parliament member, and we have 7 Israeli parliament members. And you are given the right to vote in the upcoming legislations that we are going to be introducing. We also have, I believe, Jeff, are you here? Jeff Warner? Jeff, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so you agree to be Prime Minister of Israel?
I do.
And do we have Walid here? He told me that he may not be coming because he has a funeral. Walid, are you here? Okay, is someone willing to be the president of Palestine? Nasir, are you willing to be the president of Palestine?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Jeff is the Prime Minister of Israel in this simulation. He is giving a veto power over our legislation, and Nasir is the president of Palestine. He's also given a veto power. All right. Let's go to our next order of business, and that is, I just want to go over your role as parliament members. Remember, you may be representing a district that is exclusively of your nationality, or it may be a district that is both Palestinian and Israeli in your district. All right. The first order of business is to ratify the Constitution. Libby, are you here, and would you be willing to read the Constitution?
I am here.
Thank you.
All right. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass related to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
So under the Constitution, this is a short version of the long Constitution that I showed you at the beginning of the simulation. We are the federal government. We give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, and we do not intend to supersede or supplant or undermine those governments. So, and we do not intend to undermine any agreements between those governments. So if those governments decide to create two states or one state or any other agreements between them, constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining those agreements. We constitutionally have to accept any agreement between the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Furthermore, if we pass legislation that violates their sovereignty, then we give them a veto power resulting from that legislation. So before I go to Avner, does the people in the audience, do you have any questions regarding this Constitution? Put them in the chat, and Nasir will convert those questions, your comments to a question, or ask the question outright. Nasir, do we have any questions from the audience?
No questions.
All right. Let's go to our guest, Avner. Well, before we go to Avner, let's ratify the Constitution, and then we'll go to Avner, because it's important for me to see, for Avner to see how the ratification is done. Please note that all of you parliament members, since you ran for parliament and since you were elected, you agreed to accept the Constitution. Now you are required to ratify the Constitution. So Palestinian parliament members, please ratify the Constitution.
So only Palestinian members
Only
should
Palestinian parliament members,
vote?
please ratify the Constitution.
Because the option to vote will come up every time for everybody. So if you're
Yeah.
Israeli, just X out, and then when the Israelis vote, the Palestinians just exit rather than make a vote.
Correct. Thank you for this clarification. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members ratified the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please ratify the Constitution. You are required to ratify it unless, if you do not ratify the Constitution, then you will be expelled, and the person who received the second number of votes in your district will be elected president, provided he or she ratified the Constitution. Okay, publish the vote. Okay, 100% of the Israeli parliament members. So I assume, Avner, you also accepted the Constitution. Now let's go to you, Avner, and let you have the opportunity to comment on this Constitution.
Yeah, it's really wonderful and wonderfully phrased. As I said earlier, I believe that the direction towards a confederation is I absolutely agree. So that we have no argument. We are in some dispute about the way how to get there. The way I see it is quite close to the, I mean, I think I really don't really know what would be the future arrangement between the two powers, the two nations, in between the river and the sea. I don't really know. I don't want to. I don't want to be um, imagining or about that. The only thing that I do know is that we need a kind of a system that is based on the idea of no separation. That there are two different peoples, but we are not separate. We need to do some things together. I believe the closest thing to that idea is the European Union. We need a structure that would be similar to the European Union, maybe even including Jordan in the future, maybe even including Lebanon in the future. We need a confederation similar to the European Union, and therefore the system that I'm thinking of is slightly different from this. And at the same time, I would say that, and in this system, there is no veto for every nation, but at the same time, a lot of the power stays in every nation. And except from that, I see here something very thoughtful and very well organized, and I really support this kind of ideas.
So I'm very confused.
You should be.
If you support this idea, why would you bring the idea of a European system?
I think it's basically the same. Again, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what would happen in the future. I do know that this future is depending on the people of Israel, the people of Palestine, understanding that this state of war is something that they cannot tolerate anymore. And I do believe that after this kind of understanding will find its way, and we have more people agreeing on that and saying that, we will have leaders sitting at the table and building the confederation, building a system in which there are separate entities and there is a joint entity. So in this way, certainly, if you mean that I need to support every little detail of this very detailed idea that you have here of the confederation, then no, I don't support it. But I see it as a great way forward, as a great step forward towards what I see as the future.
Okay, so we met before. You had a chance to read the Constitution, and you're telling us now that you do not support every detail of it. So this is your opportunity to tell us what specific detail you do not support.
I think generally in these points here in the Constitution, almost all of them are really, I support almost all of them. The only thing is the veto right, and I understand your emphasis on not harming the sovereignty of both nations, and I'm absolutely sure that we are heading towards a different system. At the minute, sovereignty is only in the hands of Israelis, in the hands of Jews. So part of any step forward would be taking a lot of power out of the hands of the Knesset, a lot of power of the hands of Israeli government, and moving it to another place. I don't know how that would happen. I think a lot of it depends on the impasse that we are now in this war, understanding that holding managing the conflict is something impossible. I think the Israeli right wing was very supportive of this idea that we are managing the conflict. The Hamas can be contained. The Hamas can be contained, and so on and so on. All this nonsense is now it's very clear for people in Israel that it is nonsense. But what they don't see at the minute is ways to the future. And what you see here in the Constitution is one way that if that would happen, I would certainly take part in it and support it and so on. But I don't think it's the only way.
Okay, so we passed the Constitution. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this Constitution. This is a momentous occasion in the history of humanity. Never in the history of humanity did the people that resides in the area of Israel and Palestine, in total, for the whole area, passed a mutual constitution. And because of that, this is a momentous occasion. It undermines the existing government's use of fear and hate to justify their actions. It removes the collective stigma against Israelis and Palestinians that they are unable to make peace, that they are people that are born to fight and will continue to fight forever. This Constitution provides huge political capital because it was ratified by the parliament, because the parliament was elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. And therefore, because of this momentous occasion, we have huge political capital. The president, me as president, have huge political capital. You, parliament members, have huge political capital, and we intend to spend it. It compels the governments and organizations throughout the world to contribute and it will give us new self-image. Now, Avner mentioned a detail which that he opposes, which is a veto power. That's not a detail. That's a major part of the federal government. And we are now passing legislation to clarify our veto power. So, Libby, could you please read the veto power of legislation that we are about to vote on?
All right. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable, and in the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC Constitution. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
All right, so just to clarify what's dispensable and what's indispensable, if the government is dispensable, they don't get a veto power. If they are indispensable, they get a veto power. We are the one who decide who to give the veto power to, based on what we believe is dispensable or indispensable. Example of indispensable is if we pass legislation relating to the use of land or police force or removal of the wall, then the governments of Israel or Palestine are probably indispensable. However, if we pass legislation relating to our budget or to ratifying the Constitution or applying the appointing an IPC ministers or presidents or judges, they are dispensable and they do not get a veto power. Why do we give them a veto power? Because a veto power provides a safety net to both sides, to the governments and to the people of Israel and Palestine. They are more likely to join and vote if we give them a veto power. They would see the veto power as giving them a safety net. It increases the likelihood of Israelis and Palestinians participating, both as parliament members and as voters. It decreases the Israeli and the Palestinian government's opposition to the federal government because it will remove any claims that the IPC is trying to undermine them or become a subversive organization to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. Because they are given a veto power, they cannot claim that the federal government is trying to undermine their governments. It gives legal protection to the candidates who would want to run for parliament and president, and it compels the IPC, the federal government. It compels us, it forces us to pass legislation that both sides will find least objectionable. In other words, that they will not be able to veto because the legislation benefits their own people, and it creates a platform for negotiations with a deadline. So going back to that legislation, we're going to need to vote on that. Before we vote on that, let me go to the people in the audience and ask you, do you have any questions regarding, and then we'll vote, and then we'll go to Avner for his comments. Do you have any comments, questions regarding this veto power? Please put your question.
Can I ask a question now, or wait for my turn?
You are our guest. You're free to do whatever you want. Go ahead.
So I just want to ask, why wouldn't the governments veto on the existence of the confederation?
Because
why don't you think that would happen?
Because the government of Israel and Palestine are not legitimate. They are not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. They are elected by the Israeli and the Palestinian, by the Israeli people, and the Palestinian and the Palestinian government are elected by the Palestinian people. By them vetoing the legislation, that means they are accepting the federal government, and they will not be able to, we will not allow a veto of our existence.
Joseph,
George?
real quick. Also, the veto is only, they are only able to, the governments are only able to veto when the legislation affects their, like, not, there's some legislation where
Right.
there's no veto required. So I think that, I don't know if Mr. Avner knows that, but.
Yeah, they are only able to veto legislation that affects their sovereignty. If there is no, the federal government is not legislation, it's a government.
And they are dispensable, in other words.
I'm sorry?
They are dispensable. This is where these governments are dispensable. We don't ask them about
Exactly. Okay, George, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. The second last point, I really don't understand what that means.
We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following.
No, the second to last point, in the event of changes in the entirety, that one.
In the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian government, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC constitution. So let's say we give a veto power to the Israeli government. But if the Israeli government disappears, there is no Israeli government anymore, or for that matter, there is no Palestinian government anymore. We may choose to remove that veto power and not give them a veto power if they're gone and there is another government.
I mean, in the history of these two governments, I've never seen that, but it is possible. Okay.
Well, the Israeli governments are changing all the time.
No, but there has been both Israeli and Palestinian governments for the last decades. I mean, I don't see either of them.
Changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments.
But this doesn't include elections, correct? I mean, there's elections all the time.
The Israeli and the Palestinian governments change all the time. The entirety of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are changing regularly.
Of course.
It will be up to us if they change. Let's say, for argument's sake, the government of Netanyahu, the existing Netanyahu government loses the election, and there is a new government by Yair Lapid. That's an entirely different government, and therefore we may choose, we don't have to, but we may choose to amend or repeal the veto power that we gave to the previous government.
Okay. All right.
All right. Any other questions? Let's go to voting. Israeli parliament members, please vote. I'm sorry, Palestinian parliament members, please vote. I don't see the voting, Dan. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Dan? Dan, are you there? Palestinian parliament members. Something is the voting? Do you see the voting? I don't see the voting.
There's no vote.
There's no vote. There's no vote.
Okay, Dan, can you put the voting? All right, before we do the voting, let's go to Avner for comments, and then hopefully Dan will be back and we'll do the vote. Avner, do you have any comments regarding this veto power?
Not more than what I said earlier. Maybe only a little bit too late. I understand that when you talk about an Israeli government, you talk about a government from this election and not, or disregarding totally the existing Israeli Knesset and government, which I believe doesn't make much sense. As I said,
I'm not clear about what you're saying.
I'm saying that the big question for me is what kind of power is giving to the existing powers,
to the existing governments.
And as I said, although I agree with you, I said earlier, but I'll repeat it again shortly, that although I agree with you that the Israeli government is not legitimate, and I think it was not legitimate from the days of Ben Gurion, and much less legitimate than these days. Although it's not legitimate, it is a government, and it is something that it is a political entity that is now controlling everything that has happened between the river and the sea. And therefore, I think that the real question is not vetoing the Israeli, or not the question of veto for Israeli or Palestinian that would vote to this initiative. The real question is, what do you do with the real power? which is the Israeli government.
Well, we give them a veto power.
No, no, you're not. You see them as illegitimate and try to disregard them, if I understand correctly.
We see them as illegitimate. Me personally, I see them as illegitimate, but we do not disregard them. We give them a veto power.
So,
well, so look, you're running to be part of the Knesset, which is a legislative branch in the Israeli government, even though you think that that government is illegitimate. You are recognizing its existence, but you are dealing with reality. That's what we do.
Absolutely true.
So we're doing the exact same thing. We are recognizing that they are not legitimate governments, but we understand their power to prevent us from implementing the legislation. And this is why we give them a veto power. Dan, are you back? Can you put the voting? Something, oh, okay, go ahead. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on veto power. We need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members to vote on this legislation. This is part of the, it's not part of the Constitution. This is legislation. Publish the vote on the Palestinian parliament members. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members agreed with this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Publish the vote. 6 out of 6. We have more than that Israeli, but for purposes of a demonstration, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. So let's go to the first substantive legislation regarding rebuilding Gaza, which I talked to Avner about in our meeting. Libby, would you be so kind as to read this legislation?
All right, this is Rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. The IPC is the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine, consisting of 300 parliament members elected by the entire population. Approximately 125 members represent the destroyed areas. The IPC is committed to the well-being of all people, including the 5 million individuals directly affected by the violence since October 7th. The IPC believes that the future of the Gaza and Israeli people is interconnected. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore a normal, peaceful existence in the foreseeable future. The IPC is requesting a $50 billion grant from the international community, which includes Israel and Palestine, to fund and coordinate the rebuilding of the devastated areas. The IPC will prioritize the following. 1, the IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate return of all political prisoners in Israel and Palestine to their homes. And 2, rebuilding thousands of homes, roads, hospitals, civic buildings, and infrastructure to facilitate the immediate return of all people to their homes. And 3, restoring law and order and civil society that have been destroyed. The government of Israel and Palestine are given a veto power.
All right, so we were elected by 5 million people. I am the president. You are the parliament members. We want to spend the huge capital that we received from the election and from passing the legislation and we are asking, and I am the president, I'm going to go around the world to collect funding for 50 billion grant from the international community and from private organizations and businesses in order to rebuild Southern Israel and Gaza. Before we vote, do you have any questions, the audience, the parliament members? Do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Una, go ahead.
Okay, again, thank you. I'm very busy tonight, 50 billion grant for the international blah, 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 to fund and coordinate the rebuilding. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think Israel has been bombed. It's only Palestine. What do you want to give?
What's your question, Una?
Well, why are you 15 billion grant for the rebuilding of Israel and Palestine?
What's your question?
That's my question. Why?
Why?
Is that a question?
I'm asking you, what is your question?
Maybe I don't. I'm wondering why. That's a question. Why the 50 billion grant will go for the rebuilding of Israel, which hasn't been destroyed, as far as I know, and Palestine. Why not more on Palestine and less on Israel, which is my question.
We will determine.
Okay.
So your question is, how would that money be spent?
Thank you.
In relation to the overwhelming greater destruction in Gaza than in Israel.
Don't forget I'm French.
Of course, we will take that into consideration. It's not going to be a arbitrary spending of funding. It's going to be based on need.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph.
All right, go ahead. Any other questions? Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Palestinian parliament members, we need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members. Publish the vote. 92% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted on this legislation. Let's go to our speaker, Avner Dinur. Avner, what are your comments regarding this legislation?
Well, just a short comment. Of course,
can we do the vetoes?
I apologize. I absolutely apologize. That's the main thing.
And as Palestinian president, I will not veto this.
Okay, and let's go to the president of the Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Well, the government of Israel is not clear on the meaning of some of this legislation. So until that clarification is made, we're going to veto it. For example, point 2, rebuilding thousands of homes to facilitate the immediate return of people to the homes, we completely accept. We also accept any funding from the IPC to rebuild the parts of Israel that are destroyed near Gaza. However, the building will have to be controlled and prioritized by the local municipal governments, not the IPC. The local municipal government should be in charge. We will take the funding gladly, and we will thank you for it and acknowledge it, but the government of Israel and its parts will control the funding. Also, we don't understand point 1. This seems to be, we of course want a ceasefire and immediate return of political prisoners, and hostages, but this seems to be unrelated to the main thrust of this legislation, and it sort of confuses it. Restoring law and order and civil society, point 3. This is really something that should be done by the government of Israel. And so we're not clear how the IPC, why this is part of the IPC's goal. Until some of these things are clarified, we will have to put a provisional veto in.
Well, the purpose of the legislation is not to hand the Israeli government any funding. The funding will remain with us, not with your government. We will use the funding to prioritize points 1, 2, and 3, but not to have the Israeli government take the funding as part of their budget. They are not going to touch any of the funding. It will be up to you, Mr. Prime Minister. If you decide to veto this legislation, then your government will simply not receive, your government will have to put the funding for all these rebuilding itself. So now we are not going to allow control of your government or prioritize the funding. We will decide the funding, we will decide the control, and we will decide prioritizing what needs to be rebuilt. However, should you not agree to a ceasefire and continue with the war, then you will have to answer to your own people that have elected you, because there is funding out there available to rebuild Southern Israel and Gaza. Otherwise, it will be on your watch, on your mark to do it on your own without us. So I suggest you remove the veto.
Well, I find that the government of Israel finds that very difficult to remove the veto if it will have no control and no say on what gets built on its own property, on its own land. It's a matter of you're promising us money, but you're taking away the Israeli government's sovereignty, and we can't accept that.
The only control we will agree to is technical control. In other words, if you have certain building standards, engineering standards, we are willing to accept those. In fact, we will be happy to use those standards also in Gaza. But in terms of, but we can work together, Mr. Prime Minister, on issue by issue. It doesn't have to be all of these building at the same time. We can decide on issue by issue. You, as the Prime Minister of Israel, and me, as the President of the whole area, we will be able to meet and decide issues by issues to help the people of Gaza and Israel rebuild. And I'm sure we will be able to resolve many of the issues together.
I thank you for that, and I think that we would be able to resolve the issues. But besides building standards, which I think is a very good idea that the IPC would accept Israeli, which are international building standards, but the planning on where to build a new hospital or where to build the civics building and where to have residential areas and where to have commercial and industrial areas, that has to be, the Israeli government has to, and the local municipal governments have to have a strong role in making those decisions.
So what I hear from you is a conditional veto, not an outright veto.
I want to continue. That's right. We want to continue this discussion that we've just had for the past few minutes before we fully to fully understand a lot of the issues and clear them up.
Okay, thank you. All right, Avner, what are your comments?
Basically, a little bit similar to what Jeff just said. To Mr. Prime Minister, of course, Jeff just said, I would say that the main question is who is controlling Gaza in general, which means who is controlling this rebuilding. It's not about how much money do you spend there, it's about who is controlling it. And I think Israel, from the first days of the war, is very consistent in not answering this question. And this question should have been answered on October, I don't know, 12 or 20. And it's quite clear that I think that the only way forward is when the Palestinian Authority takes responsibility for Gaza with a strong international help, with strong international both money and international authorities working on the ground in Gaza. And the question about Hamas and how in what way would they be involved, that's more problematic question that I cannot answer right now, but I'm absolutely sure that Palestinian Authority needs to be the one who is doing this work, and that should be done immediately. Not we cannot wait for a confederation to be erected. To do that, we have people in great humanitarian crisis.
Let me go to the President of Palestine and to the Prime Minister of Israel. Do you have any objections that the IPC will be on the ground managing Gaza in cooperation, or I can't think of a better word at this moment, but together in consultation with your governments?
So as I'll go first, if you don't mind, Jeff.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as Palestinian president, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. The only time it will be an issue for us is if it hinders the prospect for peace in a two-state solution and solidifies settlers on Palestinian territory and territories in the future which are going to be Palestinian. So we appreciate international assistance. We appreciate the assistance from the Confederation, but we just don't want it to hinder any our future plans for self-determination and rule over ourselves and our land and rights.
Mr. Prime Minister?
The the government of Israel would be glad to keep to open discussions, but the sovereignty of the government of Israel, just like the Palestinian president has said, that their sovereignty is important. The Israeli government's sovereignty is important. But we will be glad and open to discuss and try to plan a route forward that includes that protects the Israeli sovereignty.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the next. We don't need to beat every legislation to show that it passes. We are just demonstrating how the federal government will work. The substance at this time is less important than the showing how the federal government, the system of government, that will work together is what's important at this time to us.
It's a little confusing to me if I'm trying to play the role of the Israeli prime minister. I have to try to understand what the present and any potential future, like Lapid government or a Gantz government, how they would act. And as you know, none of the people in Israel today are very happy or open to a two-state solution. Certainly not Netanyahu, and apparently from the way they vote and talk, neither Gantz nor Lapid.
Well,
so if I'm to play the Israeli prime minister, I have to try to understand how those people would act, and I'm trying to replicate that.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that from a practical point of view, it's hard for you to do that. And I just want to tell the audience here that Jeff is trying to replicate what he thinks Israeli prime minister would do. That does not reflect his personal views, so that it's clear. Let's go to the next legislation, and that's joint economic zone. Libby, could you please read that legislation?
All right. This is about the Joint Economic Zone. Joint Economic Zone, JEZ, between Israel and Gaza. Exclusive IPC management and control in cooperation with the existing governments. Common economy. Education, industry, banking, agriculture, sewer treatment, desalination plants, solar farms, wind power, and green energy. International airport and seaport, equally accessible to Israeli and Palestinians. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian governments. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation before we take a vote? About the legislation? Nasir, do you see any questions?
No, there's no questions.
Okay. Let's go to Palestinian parliament members. Please vote on this legislation. Do you support a joint economic zone? Publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members favor this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. We need 55%. We are regularly getting way above 55%. Okay, Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation? Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, I will not.
Let's go to the President of Palestine. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I will not.
Okay, Avner, do you have any comments regarding this legislation?
Just maybe a short comment that in the past there was an economic zone in Erez,
but not a joint economic zone by a federal government.
True. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. It was not joint, or not joint enough, I would say. And
but
that
not
was
managed by a federal government.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Okay. Let's go to the next legislation, and that's teaching tolerance and understanding. Libby, would you be so kind as to read this legislation?
Right. Both educational systems making both sides aware of the history and political narrative on both sides in both public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools to achieve proficiency in both languages by Israeli and Palestinian students. create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC as facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. And we hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Okay, so we are trying to thread the needle again. Does anyone have any questions in the audience regarding this legislation? Okay, Nasir, are there any questions?
What about religious schools?
What's your question?
There's talks in public schools. A lot of education is in the religious schools, much less accessible to such a good idea.
Well, as far as we know, the government has no, well, maybe it does have control over religious school. In other words, legislative control or authority. But let's see, divorce education system making both sides aware of the history, devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians, prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools. As far as I know, in Israel, religious schools are also public schools. But Avner may know better than me on that issue. All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Publish the vote. We need 55%. We got 92% of the Palestinian parliament members voting in this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to Avner. I'm sorry. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
The Israeli government schools, the Israeli schools already teach tolerance, but the Israeli government will thank the IPC and support the IPC in any efforts to assure that Palestinian schools also teach tolerance. No veto.
Let's go to the Prime Minister, President of Palestine. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I will not. And we welcome teaching tolerance and understanding, as well as accurate history of our country.
Okay, good. Let's go to Avner. What are your comments regarding this legislation?
Yeah, my comment is maybe that this is, I would say, the most important legislation that is that we talk about today. Is it would take time, and we need people to go through a long process of educational transformation. We had, and I think teaching of Arabic was damaged in the Israeli society in the last few years. And it needs to be restored. And also about the narratives, of the other side. We had only one attempt to create a joint history of the two narratives, and that was very, very interesting initiation. That unfortunately the only school in Israel that was practicing this program is the school here, right here in near Sderot, Sha'ar HaNegev school, where most of the kibbutzim, or some of the kibbutzim who were damaged on or destroyed on October 7th. These are the kibbutzim this is the only place in Israel where they taught a joint narrative for a very short while, and then the Minister of Education in Israel decided that it's not possible anymore, and it was just thrown away, and that's a real shame.
Well, Avner, my question is not really so much about the legislation itself. My question has to do with, does the passing of legislation, that what we have demonstrated to you, that Palestinians and Israelis voted for the same legislation, that Israeli Prime Minister did not veto it, the Palestinian president did not veto it, does that give, in your mind, greater validity to having a common federal government, especially when you said that this is probably the most important legislation?
Unfortunately, I cannot say yes. Unfortunately, I cannot show much enthusiasm and hope. Because I believe people that gathered here in this simulation are very supportive of these ideas, and unfortunately, the people of Israel and the people of Palestine are not ready for any of these, and it takes time, and that's why I think education.
How do you know that? How do you make that determination that they are not ready?
Just open the paper. Just open the news.
Well, the idea hasn't been introduced to them. What paper will I ever find that discusses a federal government? What paper will I ever find in Israel or Palestine that discusses peace? Peace is completely outside the discussion in Israel or Palestine.
Exactly.
So I'm going back to my question. On what basis do you make that determination that this will not be accepted just because it was not introduced to them?
Joseph, exactly on this basis. You have multiple organizations who are supporting peace, who are promoting tolerance, who are promoting the discussion of narratives. And these organizations that do the work on the ground, not in America, but here, these organizations, including my organization, FAB, Friendship Across Borders, and Competence for Peace, and the Parent Circle, and so on, they all work on tolerance and understanding, on shared narratives. And they do excellent work, but all of our work is so hard to find participants. It's so hard to persuading people from the right wing to participate. It's so hard to when you do convene. It's so hard even to convene. We were supposed to meet in August, and then our flights were canceled because there's no flights here during the war. And when you do have the chance to be convened together in one room, you have very oppositional voices, very hard statements from all sides. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. So this is the basis. And
but is that before October 7 or after October 7?
After October 7, it's much harder, of course.
Avner, all these organizations that you're talking about, including you yourself, and you are only speaking in the constellation of Israel versus Palestine, not in the constellation of a common federal government. And you are making your predictions or your analysis based on experience that you personally had with the current constellation of Israel versus Palestine. So I ask you again, what is your basis upon which to make any predictions regarding the introduction of a federal government in Israel and Palestine that will give the people of Israel and Palestine the power to vote and to be elected?
I see no other way to answer you, Joseph. If the Messiah will come in the next two weeks, and the Messiah will bring an Israeli-Palestinian confederation, and just throw it from the sky, and then it will fall down on the earth on where I live. Of course, things will be different, but I don't see that as a real option. And therefore, I answer you according to reality, not according to the dream. And I think the dream is very important. I don't want to disencourage you to prosper this dream, to move it forward. I'm myself. I'm as I said, I support it, and as you see, I find the time to be with you, to speak, to think about it. But I talk about these ideas from reality, and this reality is very, very far from what you want me to talk.
But Avner, what's the better solution?
Can we finish?
Right, hold on,
Samir,
we'll
do the general discussion afterwards.
Later. All right, let's have a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government? Now, everyone is asked to vote. Please vote. Everyone, including everyone, meaning including Avner, everyone, please vote. It's important vote. Okay, 10 more seconds to vote. Okay, publish the vote. And okay, here we have 100%. Before we had one person who voted no. I'm interested to know if that person changed his mind or if he's no longer in our audience. If you are a person who voted no before, or declined to vote, or voted yes, please speak up, because I'm interested in knowing whether you have changed your mind or you just, okay. I don't see that person. Okay, if you decide to come later, let me know. All right. Okay, so now we're going to go to closing remarks. A common democratic confederation government can bring peace. It's not going to fall out of the sky. The Messiah is not going to come. It's us that will create the federal government. It's only a matter of funding and creating an awareness. Online election is realistic. It's feasible. It can be held by security. 1 week of war between Israel and Gaza cost over $3 billion. That's between Israel and Gaza. We are not even including Lebanon and Iran and Syria and Iraq and Yemen. We anticipate that it will cost $100 million to create the federal government. That's not the Messiah. That's us creating the federal government. The current government of Israel and Palestine are not legitimate in the entire area of Israel and Palestine, and democracy is the only way to bring peace with transparency, with accountability. These assumptions are realistic. They could become a reality if we put our minds and our efforts into it. That's why we are having the ad in the New York Times to make it a reality. And it is possible to make it a reality. This is what $100 million costs. We can make these assumptions with $100 million. So I'm going to open up now the conversation. I'm going to ask Nasir to manage the conversation. I need to take a short break, like 2-minute break, and I'll be right back.
Okay. So please, we're going to do questions. Please raise your hands and try to make your questions as brief as possible so that we can give plenty of time to Mr. Avner. And Mr. Avner, usually questions go for about a half hour. If you're pressed on time, let me know and I will try to move things along for you. First person is Una. Una, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, hi. First of all, to Professor Avner, 2 questions for you, sir. No, first of all, what is your narrative about, what would you tell the Israeli children about the narrative, about history of Israel? The true narrative I'm talking about, not the Disneyland. What would you teach the children in Israel about the land? Number 1 question.
I didn't understand the question.
Sorry,
what do I teach when I teach the joint narrative?
Yes, about the how did Israel was born? What was how did it happen? Do you understand? I know, but because it's a loaded question. Do you know Professor Ilan Pape?
Yeah.
Well, he's a good friend of mine, and he was kicked out of Israel for having given his student the true story of Israel. Therefore, you have to be very careful, but that's another story. Now, as you can gather, I'm French with my accent, and I went to Palestine, and I was violently attacked by the word colon, and they were French. How are you going to deal with the French colons who are still Zionists, that is, who are still arriving from France to go to live in Israel? They're going to settle in Israel. How our poor friend Joseph is going to start his new beautiful icy jet because they're still arriving. So what will you do with them?
So should we take one answer at a time, or what do you suppose? No, our Nasir.
Yeah, go ahead. Take one question at a time.
Yeah. Okay. So nowadays, I think it's very hard to teach the Palestinian narrative. For what I do most of when I'm doing my academic work is part of it is teach Israeli Jewish students and also Arabic citizens of Israel to teach them the Palestinian narrative as much as I can, as much as I understand it. I see as an academic, I don't try to show who is right and who is wrong. I only try to show the parts that are not known for the people. And I try, since I'm more of a philosopher than an historian, I don't teach too many facts, and I try to analyze the facts and to ask questions about what is Zionism and how what kind of Zionism is supportive of a future that is realistic for this area, moral and realistic for this area, and other questions that regard to that. I'm not really sure if I answered your question. But this is a lot of educational work that I think needs to be done, and actually the best way to do that, I think, is not by academic lectures and not by writing history books. It's by people meeting each other, listening to each other, and hearing very hard things from the other side, hearing Israelis meeting Palestinians who were very tolerant in the past, and now they say we are Hamas supporters, and then to say, okay, so who can we do peace with? Can you do and who is the other side? It's something that I think only through meeting can be achieved.
Yeah, but without disrespect to you, Avner, surely you have to tell them the true story, not a little, package to suit everybody. Are you allowed to tell Israeli child that Israel was a land stolen from Palestine? That's a true story.
I
Will
tell
you
them
be
the
allowed?
true story. I tell them the true story about the colonial perspective of of the Zionist movement. I certainly do that. Certainly do that.
Thank you.
And I think the fact that most Israelis find it very hard to listen to the fact that they are colonialists, and most of them find it so hard to hear that because of a very simple reason. They understand colonialism as as a phrase or a political setting that means that very shortly they would have to leave the land. And this is actually quite problematic because almost all the colonial entities in the world didn't solve are now solved, almost all of them. Although most of them, even almost all of them, are not solved in a good way for the indigenous inhabitants of the land, of course.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they are solved, and they are solved
Yeah.
not by kicking the new settlers out, but finding a way to live together. And I think it's very clear that this is the future that we are expecting in Palestine. We're expecting a future where people will find a way to live together.
Yeah. But don't forget, being French, the French people still find it very difficult to accept that the French army killed 6 million North Africans. And
Una, have you ever heard someone who forgets the French? How can you forget French people? It's impossible.
Okay.
Merci.
Thank you, Una. Before I go to the next question, I wanted to touch base because when I was listening to your comments about the legislation about teaching tolerance, this is very touchy because a few years ago I started to study Hebrew, and I started to interact with more and more Israelis, and including in Jerusalem, where my family's from and where I have a home. And it's something that you touched based on that I think that a lot of people that are outside the country don't understand, and that's the mindset. And for example, not only just regarding what happened in history with the formation of Israel and what happened to the Palestinians, but even current events, for example, like the Second Intifada. Like me as a Palestinian, the Second Intifada was started because of Sharon's provocative visit to Masjid al-Aqsa, and that's why we call it the Al-Aqsa Intifada. To Israelis, it was caused because the Palestinians just resorted to violence and started bombing buses. Things regarding even like I wrote something down and I can't read my writing. For example, the narrative that that Jews from across the Middle East, from Iraq and stuff, came to Israel because they were kicked out, and therefore Palestinians should just accept going to other Arab nations and being incorporated into the population there. And even now we're going to add October 7th to this list because Israelis were everything was fine, and then suddenly one day on October 7th we got attacked out of nowhere like nothing before happened. And the fourth one finally is that, you know, we gave these people a state and they didn't accept it. They resorted to violence. And the thing is that the more and more I come across, and these are average day Israelis, not the people like you in academia who study history, but these are things that are literally like embedded into the mindset of Israelis that is just something that's over just too much to kind of like that we need to attack. And that's why I agreed with what you said earlier, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, was that the mindset of the everyday Mo and Shmo on the streets is a serious problem for organizations that do what you do and what we propose here in this confederation.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Nasir. I totally accept everything that you said, maybe except one small thing. Well, not so small, which is October 7th. I think that October 7th is, of course, it's not the beginning of the conflict, but October 7th marks a different phase in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's a phase where Israelis feel much more vulnerable, especially us in the area around Gaza. I have very good friends who were murdered on that day. Me myself have experienced a great fear in my home for 30 hours in the safe room. We had a very shocking experience. Unfortunately, this experience was translated into a war of vengeance, which is not proportionate in any way, not legitimate in any way, and doesn't promote a different future. It doesn't promote, it just tries to promote the same, to repeat history again, and again. And I think that that after this kind of crisis, a new way of thinking will have to evolve. So it's not just another something that happened. Never in the past we had an event where more than 50,000 people in this land, or on this land, were killed in one long event. Never in the past we had that, and I hope this will end shortly. But it's very clear that this is a landmark that is very, very strong in the history of our region. And except for that, everything that you said is absolutely true. It's something that needs a lot of work on the ground, in schools, in universities, on the street, in campaigns. Surely, sure.
I have another question, but I'm going to let the other ones go first. Samir, your question, and can you please make it pretty brief?
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Avner. Thank you, Nasir. My question is not a question. It is, a question and comment. Since you don't see the IPC as a possible solution at this time, so Avner, what do you suggest as an alternative solution at this time?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't oppose the IPC in any way. I'm a little bit skeptical.
I know you don't, but I mean you think that it is not possible to implement at this time. So
I'm skeptical.
what is your solution? What do you propose?
Yeah, so I'm skeptical about how. I'm absolutely sure that we are heading towards a future where three political entities will be working on the ground.
What are they?
Israel, just like in the IPC, an Israeli entity, a Palestinian entity, and a joint entity. I'm absolutely sure that this is the future that we are heading towards. The question is, how do we get there? How do we promote this future? My answer for that would be, first of all, this kind of simulation. I came here to support it. I came here to be part of it. So I'm not against it in any way. This is one answer. My second answer would be dialogue and education, and dialogue and education, and dialogue and education. And you need, and I do it myself in different ways, especially in FAB, in Friendship Across Borders, but also other organizations do it in a great way. And it's still very hard, but they do a lot of good work.
Did you have like something like Cousins Club?
Yeah, I'm just missing one point.
Like 30 years ago, there was a Cousins Club was created here in Los Angeles.
The Cousins Club.
Cousins Club, where Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians talk, dialogue. We have created that 30 years ago here in Los Angeles. Myself and Dan Bustani and many others, and Casey Kasem.
There's always dialogue. There was always different ways of dialogue, and it was always for very few people. And I think this is should be nourished and developed in any possible way. And I do think that on the other branch of what I do and what I believe should be done is political work within the existing structures of power, which means the Knesset. And I mean, it's not only the Knesset, it's also demonstrations, and it's also different organizations, and maybe even the IPC, maybe. But I think so this is what I think should be done.
Okay, and you don't think that
not overlooking
two-state solution will work, and you don't think that one-state solution will work?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If you look at the basic values that we in our party and all its citizens have created, you will see that we don't. And this is also an answer for Shlomo from the beginning of our talk. You will see now in our draft of the main values that we don't clearly support none of the existing solutions to the conflict. We are not supposing one state, not a two-state, and not a confederation or federation, which is
okay.
the four options more or less: one state, two state, federation, and confederation. We don't support any possible of any of these because because our main
but do you support ending the occupation and ending apartheid system?
Of course.
That's
absolutely.
number one. Yes.
Of course, absolutely. And the way to do that, I think, the way to do that is being very, very clear on the idea that Palestinians and Israelis are not going to be in separate states, even if you have a two-state solution. We're talking about two states in a very, very tight, collaborative setting. We are talking about two states, and actually part of the Geneva initiation, even part of Oslo, I think Oslo was a disaster, but even part of the Oslo agreements is built on the idea that these states are not separate in any way. These states are in very close collaboration. So a separation, but on the other hand, what Oslo Accords and the Oslo process and Rabin and Peres and all these people have created, they created a dream or an idea of separation, of the idea that the solution would come through separation. Now, I don't think that necessarily a two-state solution is impossible. It is possible, a two-state solution, but we're talking about two states with very tight collaborations. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it seems to me like you're close to my idea that actually ending the occupation and ending the apartheid system, that's number one, and then hold general elections in historic Palestine and let them decide whether they want one-state solution or two-state or three-state or IPC. Let them decide later in democratic, secular state.
Sure, for sure, I would support that if that is happening.
Yeah.
The question is how to make it.
I was gonna
happen, and I don't think. I absolutely don't think.
Samir, I'm gonna put the platform again in the link for the platform because it answers a lot of your questions. Also, I noticed one thing is that it wasn't clear whether or not you supported, and Shlomo, I thank you for answering Shlomo's question. I was going to actually bring that. He asked it earlier. The other thing I noticed about it is you mentioned something that's very interesting in the platform: democratic constitution. As we all know, Israel does not have a constitution. Yeah. So is that part of the platform that you have a constitution which will tell people this is what your rights are?
Absolutely. I think the fact
good,
that Israel doesn't have a constitution is a big problem, and I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shlomo.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly. So, do you hear me? Okay. Okay, so very quickly. So ending the occupation, what if there are no two states? Is one state a possible solution for you, as far as meaning equal rights between the river and the sea? Is this something that you can live with, or you really want the separation?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, I don't know how to say it in more words than I already did.
Okay.
I absolutely believe that full one democratic state that is not taking in consideration the different entities and the different identities of the people, of the Palestinians, the Jews, Israelis, Arabs, Muslims and Jews, Muslim and Christians. If you don't take that into serious consideration, you say this is a democracy like I'm missing a word here, but this is just a democracy, and that's it. I think that is not a good step forward. Although, if you have if that reality would come closer, of course I would support it. Of course.
Wait a second. So if we have one state, you understand? So do you prefer a democratic, like Gideon Levy said, I prefer a democratic state than on Jewish state. Is this your position too?
I personally, and I again, I invite you to read our platform, our main values, and you can see that our main objection is to the idea of a Jewish state. We are opposing a Jewish state, which means, by the way, that at the minute, according to Israeli laws, if you oppose a Jewish state, you're in a big problem. You cannot run to Knesset, as you probably know, and that's a problem.
But nevertheless, you are running for the Knesset.
Yeah, hopefully we'll find a way. We'll find a way, and maybe. When we will run, maybe the Supreme Court would run this video of the IPC and say, "Hey, you see, Avner was saying that he is against the Jewish state," and that would determine that we cannot run to Knesset. Maybe, but clearly there are many parties in the Knesset who are against a Jewish state. Of course, all the Arab parties and the Haredic parties are against a Jewish state, but they found a way. They found a way, and I'm not saying that I support them in any way.
Well,
so
by the way,
all right.
Do you know that the IPC wanted to
how are we doing on time, Nasir?
We're good. We usually go till about 9:30 your time. So if you need to leave earlier, that's not.
Wow.
Yeah. Samir, I'm gonna move to the next one. So
to
Alan,
remind him,
and then
I just want to remind him of the billboard that the Jewish.
Okay.
Good for the Jews. The IPC wanted to put it last November, but because of October 7, it was cancelled. So is that still possible to put it in Tel Aviv? The billboard, the Jewish state is bad for the Jews.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Go ahead, Alan.
So I'm sorry, it's just a second. So yeah, how do you view Zionism? Are you a Zionist? How would you define yourself? And number two, about education, and here I'm done. Before you talk about education, you need the truth. So the most important thing is that we live on a mountain of lies all over in the United States, definitely in Israel. So that's the first thing for education is the truth. Even October 7, we don't really know what really happened because there was no investigation, no thorough investigation, nobody from outside of Israel. We know about the Hannibal direction, and we know about a few things. We have pieces, and the people put together those pieces, and we don't really have the truth even about October 7. let alone the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict from 1930, from the 20s, actually, all the way to now. So we need to really work hard.
Should be investigated.
Okay, I'm gonna take control because we're gonna move on. Did you want to comment on that real quick? Samir, can you mute, please? Because
Yeah.
and Shlomo, if you're done as well. Avner, did you want to respond to that before I move to the next question?
Yeah, just Shlomo, if you're interested in my ideas about Zionism, I'll be very happy to send you a few pieces to read or to watch. So you have my email on the chat. I will be. But I think you get some kind of idea from what I said until now, and no, I'm certainly not a Zionist.
Okay, go ahead, Alan. Alan, unmute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Alan, you need to unmute yourself.
There I am. Thank you. Yes, this continues a very excellent project and discussion. On the last, well, the one contribution I want to add is that we have a view from old imperialism that a state is defined by a government, a border, and an army, and it has exclusive sovereignty. In the reality of the world, we are coming to, the notion of exclusive sovereignty, I think, needs to be re-examined, and that could be part of this confederation. Sovereignty is a relation of identification in the heart, not necessarily on the land with an army. And if we see that Israel is all of historic Israel as held in the hearts of those people who so fear it, and likewise Palestine. And these two states exist side by side, interpenetrating, sometimes in the same person. And we would benefit in this sense of confederation by looking at sovereignty as redefining sovereignty in terms of relationships among people, rather than exclusive control over any piece of land. Because as it is, people walk over the same land side by side, neighbor by neighbor, and inclusively it will be the case. We need to redefine sovereignty as relation of peoples in the heart, and that way the confederation makes it much easier to cross over that line of separation of history to a common sense of what is the future we are building together. But most essential, and it has not really been mentioned, unless the resources of both peoples begin to be joined toward dealing with the global questions of energy use and climate and so on, both our societies in Israel and Palestine and in the rest of the world are in grave trouble. So as an impetus to cooperation and seeing that we are both peoples of the heart seeking to cooperate. And Joseph, I commend you for your persistent efforts going on long before I ever knew you were doing this. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Did you have comments, Avner, or it wasn't really a question? It was.
Yeah, thank you, Alan, for that. Absolutely wonderful saying that. I would only add to what you're saying that change in the perspective of what is sovereignty is very needed, and you're right, absolutely right about that. But I don't think that it means necessarily erasing sovereignty or disregarding sovereignty or not having any kind of sovereignty. And I want to say about that I think we should take in consideration the fact that the two people we are handling here are post-traumatic people. And we have a Palestinian post-Nakba people, and we have a Palestinian post the war crimes in Gaza people. So it's not only post-traumatic, it's very recent post-traumatic, the first Nakba and now the second Nakba. And we have the people of Israel who are building their identity on the basis of a catastrophe, of the basis of the Shoah, the Holocaust. And therefore, I think that both post-traumatic people need some kind of security that is based on the idea that our people are in some way in charge. So I think to just erase that and say, okay, you don't have any kind of sovereignty would make things very, very complicated and very, very problematic. But to think in the idea of a joint sovereignty, of an idea where you have an Israeli identity, you have a Palestinian identity, and you also have a joint identity, is something very, very optimistic. And I think the fact that the IPC is promoting that is very valuable.
All right, thank you. Rashid, is it Rashid? Is that pronounced?
It's Rashid. Thank you.
Oh, Rashid.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I want to build on what Avner just said about people who went through collective trauma. I'm an anthropologist and a sociologist. So I look at nations, people's history, the philosophies, and their group dynamics in society. And I've been paying attention to the Middle East for a while, even before I went to university. And what I noticed in this situation is, especially after October 7th, is that there is a need, it appears, for a new national narrative for both the Israelis and for the Palestinians, because if you build your national narrative based on trauma, you kind of reenact the trauma in a symbolic way. And by doing that, you actually are keeping yourself in a kind of post-traumatic stress, culturally speaking. And as long as you do that, there's always going to be this projection on the other as a threat, because you're based on trauma. So maybe, besides this confederation, it's a good idea to work towards a new narrative that people can base their identities upon. I just want to bring this in.
Yeah. So Rashid, I would, if you would like to read a paper that I wrote on how identity needs to change in order to promote understanding between two peoples, I would be very happy to send you that paper that was published in English. And yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can also add to what you're saying. Some idea that I find very valuable here is the idea that I take from Desmond Tutu from South Africa, who said that that wounded healers are always better healers than any other. And Tutu is promoting the idea that, or promoted the idea that people who are post-traumatic could be healers, could be of course they could be because of their trauma be more hostile and more violent. Of course they could be, but they could also harness the trauma and use it for healing. And I think that's what should be done. I write my email again on the chat, so if any of you is interested in these materials, I'll be very, very happy to share with you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Avner, I have a question. I told you that I had another question, sort of comment. Maybe you can help me about this opinion that I have. Organizations like the Confederation and other initiatives, I think that sometimes when we focus more on things like economic and infrastructure cooperation, this is something that can get more people on board from both sides, because the country, the infrastructure, roads, and economies are so linked together. It seems to me that, like you saw the popularity of the joint economic zone, like even the Israeli prime minister would jump on board with this, the Palestinian would, because there's an economic advantage to both sides. We have we all have interest to live better lives and to be more prosperous, you know, whether or not we have political rights or not. And sometimes even for Palestinians, that's actually more important. Security for their land, economic opportunity. Sometimes they see this as more important than political rights, you know, and it's definitely not a substitute for it. But I feel that this is something that will, when organizations like this, like what we do here and stuff, focus on these measures, it can sort of usher in the political changes that need to be done later. But at the same time, it's a dangerous game to play for Palestinians, because while we focus in like what Oslo was a disaster for us, in a sense, it did change things in the days of lives of Palestinians in the West Bank, but at the same time, it allowed Israeli settlements to go expand from the 240,000, I think, when Oslo was signed, to now we have about 750,000 settlers in 1967 territories. So it's sort of a balancing act. So in your opinion, is that what you were talking about when you said that we have to have sort of a pragmatic approach, because it has to be something that's acceptable, and that's the way a way to sneak in, I don't want to say sneak in, but like bring about the political changes that's needed for a real peace and justice solution, to start with the economic and sort of these cultural things and
yeah. Well, actually, I'm not a very pragmatic person in my character. I'm a dreamer. I'm a philosopher and dreamer, and I don't think I don't know anything about economics and about investments and so on. Of course, I would support it. But actually, yeah, I agree with everything you said. Everything.
And then my other question was, when you said that you're not a Zionist, I want to ask you this because I ask many Israelis this. Like, as a Palestinian, I would love to see Zionism go away, but at the same time, I know it's entrenched in Israeli culture and society. So, can Zionism be reformed? Can it be reformed to exist, and maybe remove its elements of Jewish supremacy and domination over the land, or is it just a failed venture and it just has to be gotten rid of?
That's a wonderful question, and I would just absolutely love if we have another Zoom here for maybe 1 hour or 1 hour and a half to speak only about that. And I would be very happy to do that without any voting, just learning together.
Yeah, I will invite you to do a podcast together.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have him and maybe Rabbi Hanan, who's a Zionist who believes in reform, that Zionism can be reformed.
I know, yeah.
You know Hanan?
Hanan is a good friend.
Okay, he's a good, he's a friend of mine too, and this is something that I catch him on all the time, because he believes that Zionism can be reformed, and where you have, I think it'll be interesting to bring these two together, Joseph, in a kind of a discussion.
Yeah,
I think that Zionism could be made less and less relevant.
What I think, if you end the occupation and end the apartheid system, then Zionism already, it doesn't matter. It will be irrelevant. Whether you reform it or you don't reform it, it doesn't matter. The main thing is ending the occupation and ending the apartheid system and having a democratic state. Secular democratic state. That's it. So unless the people think whatever they think about that, anything they want to do.
But the problem is, Samir, there's laws, for example, a law that was just being read in the Knesset now, that's going to target the family of Palestinians who are involved in attacks, and now go after the family and say deport them. The concept that you can deport
that has
these
to
people.
be cancelled. Those
That's what I'm saying. So it's not just about the occupation; it's also about laws internal within Israel.
Of course, the whole apartheid system has to be dismantled. Period.
We have to go to the beginning of Zionism. There were different streams, different branches. The main branch, unfortunately, was the idea of replacement, but there were others that wanted the binational state, you know, and living together with the locals, Palestinians. So there was Zionism. And as you can say, okay, we have a homeland for the Jews, but we live with Palestinians, and that's okay. Something along this line.
Did anybody else want to raise their hand or have a question? Because I think we're coming to a conclusion.
Yeah, I think we're coming. I want
Okay,
to
go ahead,
thank
Joseph's last
Avner
comments.
for a
Thank you.
very
Thank you, Mr.
honest
Avner.
and frank discussion. And I want to thank you for your generosity and allowing us to meet with you, for you to review our proposals and go over our website and the Constitution. We are very, very appreciative of that fact. And I think you were very honest, and we enjoyed the conversation. And I want to thank you so much for coming. And hopefully we'll have another podcast with you where we can delve deeper into issues. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for your generosity and for your time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank
Goodbye,
you,
everybody.
Avner.
See you in 2 weeks.
Merci, merci.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,